Today, by the way, my name is David, and I'm speaking from Romania. Usually based in Brussels, but during this crisis, I'm here in Romania with my family. So today, I'm going to speak to you about universal basic income and job automation, and I'm going to try to explain the relations between the two, and hopefully, to, in a sense, show you why job automation could potentially be basic income could potentially be a solution to counteract some of the negative effects of job automation. So we've seen before, and this is not the first time I present at Rockit. Last year I was speaking about automation, and there are plenty of people nowadays discussing about this topic. So you all know how automation and job automation in particular is one of the big topics nowadays, the trendiest topics. Experts say automation will lead to the dissolvement, to losing some jobs, whilst at the same time technology will help some new jobs to be created. I was recently doing some research on jobs that are trendy nowadays, jobs that are sought after by employees and employers alike. And I came up with two of them: cybersecurity analyst and data scientist. Who would have thought 20 years ago that these would be some of the hottest jobs, not just in the tech industry, but in all companies nowadays? However, who also would have thought 20 years ago that being a truck driver or a call center agent might be dangerous in terms of job security, because these jobs are at risk of being automated. They're some of the, let's say, riskiest jobs that you can have nowadays. So the net effect of automation is hard to calculate because there are some jobs that are lost, some jobs that are created. What we do know for sure is that automation will impact and is already impact the labor market in some way or the other. So my question for you today is job automation potentially, or the negative effects of job automation, are they counteracted by universal basic income if this concept is implemented? So this is the question. And before we actually get down to see some of the pros and cons to this debate, because this is a huge debate which finally has received the attention that I think it deserves, especially now with the coronavirus crisis. Before we tackle this question head on, I want a bit to look at some of the challenges that potential universal basic income can help with, because it's not just job automation. Yes, this is the main one. As you can see, we all know how across developed economies, especially in jobs in manufacturing, in factories, jobs like this are very much at risk. Robots are already taking over. We see mechanical hands, robotic hands that are already taking over some of the employees of even Amazon, a big tech company. We've seen more and more robots on the sort of a ground floor of factories, and not just in factories. We see also in accountancy and law and in other, let's say, service sectors, the same risk. And it's interesting to look at some of the figures, some of the data that we have on this. So back in 2013, a study conducted by University of Oxford in the UK estimated that approximately 47% of US jobs are at risk of automation. European figures would be similar for Germany and the UK, around 43%. The same team at Oxford University conducted the same study in present day, and the number doubled. It's 85% now of US jobs that can be automated as of this moment, which is pretty much insane if you think about it. And again, when I say jobs being automated, I don't mean the whole job being destroyed, but certain tasks in the job being automated. Very few jobs, I think only 5% of jobs are completely at risk of automation. Jobs, as I said, as call center agent or truck driver are high at risk. Most jobs have tasks that can be automated, which is something I really keen on emphasizing. So besides job automation, there's another issue which potentially universal basic income can help counteract. And obviously we don't have the advantage of being face to face, but I'm gonna ask you, who do you think these 8 white men are? And I'm sure all of you at least recognize Mark Zuckerberg and probably Jeff Bezos, if not the others as well. So these are the 8 billionaires that own the same amount of wealth as the rest of us, as the poorest half of the world, or the people who don't have obviously billions in their bank account. They're not responsible necessarily for income inequality, but they're a result of globalization and what has been achieved with the sort of a world we live in nowadays. So income inequality is a big issue, and as I said, these 8 people do own, half of or even more than half of today's income for poor people. So let's look again a bit at some of the data here. I mentioned already the sort of 8 billionaires own the same wealth as the poorest half. richest 1%, to give you a different perspective, own more than the rest of the world combined. And this number is interesting because I have here next to me actually written. So in 2010, it was 388 people owning as own more or as much as the rest of the world combined. In 2015, it was 62. In today's world, it's 8. So you can see from 388, or let's say almost 400, to 62 to 8 people in a span of 10 years. That's how crazy this income inequality has gotten. Unfortunately, this trend is continuing. Income inequality is rising. And if we look at the other half of the equation, with the poorest half of the world, their income has been either stagnating or pretty much not changing more than a single cent every year. Their income has not risen in decades, which is a worrying, I think. And it's part of the reason why universal basic income can be a potential solution. And as we'll see later, it can help tackle some of these both job automation and income inequality as well. So why universal basic income is again on the agenda. For me, it's not the reason I got interested in it. I was actually doing a research for my master's thesis last year, towards the end of the year, and then when the coronavirus crisis started, this whole topic became again trendy on the agenda, and for good reason, because I think it can offer potential solutions for some of the issues we see now society has. Because what the coronavirus did is, amongst other things, highlight some of the things we should improve after the crisis is over. So if we reflect well and do our homework right, we hopefully will be able to come better after this crisis. So what is universal basic income? For those of you who don't know, it's the name suggests exactly what it is. It's basically an income that should cover basic needs, and that is given universally to everybody, and it's given by the government also. It's important to emphasize that's at least the theory of it. To define it by the book, so to say, it's a fixed income that every adult, rich or poor, working or idle, and this is very important, working or idle. You can be working, ideally, in a universal basic income world and still receive this monthly income. And it's automatically received from the government, again, very important, with no strings attached. You don't have to prove to the government that you earn something, or you don't have to prove that you're in a sort of a poverty situation. Everybody receives this income. So its main purpose is to, first of all, reduce poverty, and as I said, some of the negative effects that can come out of job automation, as well as increase equality among all citizens. So why is it different from other social welfare programs? Because plenty of countries, especially countries in Scandinavia, have pretty good social welfare systems. Why is UBI different? It's because it goes to everyone, regardless of age, employment, or need, essentially becoming a fundamental right that every human has. And it's also very simple, because now, as I mentioned, it's social welfare programs. Some of them work, some of them don't. The problem with them is, in many cases, that there's so many that it's hard to manage. There's a lot of bureaucracy involved, and UBI can lead actually to easier administration and less bureaucracy. So these are some of the key differences between UBI and other social welfare programs. So now let's look a bit at the pros and cons, because this has been a really exciting debate recently. So supporters of UBI usually see it as an answer to the fundamentally changed labor market, which has been transformed not just because of tech disruption, as I mentioned here, but also now because of the coronavirus crisis, as we can see very well. I think in America there's approximately 30, if I'm not mistaken, 30 million people who had lost their jobs in the last months, which is actually scary, because this figure has not been seen since the Great Depression in the 1930s. So obviously there's a need for some sort of a safety net for these people who have lost their jobs. And also it reduces poverty, because sometimes people forget, but people are poor because they don't have money in many cases. So by allocating every person a sum of money to cover their basic needs, you would, in a sense, help solve this huge issue, poverty. Obviously, as to every debate, there's critics as well, and critics usually accuse UBI of being a lazy option. That's how they call it, at least. It's an option which, in their opinion, it might discourage people from working, because some argue that if people would get money on a monthly basis, this might just encourage them to sit on their couch, watch Netflix all day, and live off these benefits. And we've seen this happening in quite a few countries. Scotland, the country where I live, had this great social welfare system, so people were moving from across the world to benefit from it. However, and I don't want to criticize the critics, because they do have some valid points, but people who used to live off their benefits did so because there's a phenomenon called poverty trap. Poverty trap is when you give somebody benefits and you tell him or her that if you get a job, you actually will be cut off from the benefits, which is obviously it disincentivizes people from actually getting a job. They prefer to live off in the security of the benefits than risk getting a job and being fired and then having to reapply for the benefits again. That's why I say this is quite a tricky thing to think it's discouraging people from working, because in my opinion, UBI would actually help people to focus on some of the jobs they truly want to do. Obviously, not all people would do it, but the majority will, in my opinion. The expensive part, it's probably harder to counteract, because it is true the cost of a UBI is pretty high. And I read recently that as much as UBI is gaining ground and it's becoming more of an option for many countries, it would be initially pretty hard to implement in a developing country because of the different tax systems and obviously the income levels that there are in these countries. But there are ways to pay for it. And these are just three of the ways that I find are some of the most popular and also most pragmatic. You can redirect costs from other social programs like food stamps. And as I said, with UBI, you would immediately cut all the other social welfare programs and just focus everything on UBI. You would, in a sense, make sure UBI works for everybody and cut the other, let's say, in some cases, less effective social welfare programs. Dividends from shared resources, we have carbon dividend, land tax. There's plenty of things still to tax that could help with UBI. You can tax sugar, you can tax tobacco, and use some of that funding to help implement UBI. And obviously, there's also increased taxation from other sources. There's tech companies, there's billionaires who are not taxed to the same amount that they should. So there are plenty of ways to get the funding needed. Because to be honest, and I did do some research in terms of how much it would actually cost if we try to implement it today. And based on the figures I found, it would cost America at least $3 trillion. So $3 trillion would be the amount today to implement UBI, which is a lot, but it is doable based on just these three options I provided here. So has UBI worked? And this is the question, because even though UBI is a term that has recently become again popular, it has been actually going on for quite some time now. Alaska was the first to implement such a guaranteed income, and it's been going on for over 40 years now. And in this case, Alaska is quite a special case because obviously you have to pay people to stay there in some cases because of the rough conditions, and the money comes from oil revenue. So it's a special context. But Finland also tried it as well. And in Finland's case, even though it was not continued because of a change of government and a change of priorities, it did showcase that the unemployed people who received the 560 euros per month, they did find more happiness, and they did have a chance to sort of look for work which they really care about. In Canada, again, another experience showed the same thing, and the examples are plentiful. Kenya has started the program. Different states in California and the US have started the program to test it, and so far the results have been encouraging. Again, from the US, an example, and more recently, actually, Andrew Young, a candidate from the Democrats to the presidential elections, really brought the UBI debate again on the agenda, even before this whole coronavirus crisis. He actually based his whole agenda on UBI. He actually campaigned to give Americans over the age of 18 $1,000 per month as a universal basic income payment. And he's actually credited for doing it successfully, because even now, I mean, he lost the candidacy. He's not running now. It's somebody else. It's Joe Biden for the Democrats. But his program is still running. And especially in these times, it proves to be crucial for some people who are, unemployed even before the coronavirus started. So he helped brought the UBI on the agenda. And in my opinion, COVID will hopefully help push it through finally in other parts of the world, not just in the US, because we've seen recently, after the pandemic hit economies across the world, the movement gaining a lot of strength. 500 political figures and academics globally have called for UBI in the fight against this new and deadly virus. And all of them did call for it to be implemented, but obviously not right at this stage. Most economies still need to balance themselves and have a stability before you can implement any sort of large-scale UBI. But it should be a solution that is implemented soon after the crisis, is pretty much over. And since March, 14 countries use some form of cash transfer and basic income program. I can share with you some of them. Australia, one-time cash payment of $750 to seniors. China, expanding one of their social welfare programs for families. Hong Kong, one-off cash injection of to almost 7 million adult residents in need. Plenty of countries around the world have done so, and I think there's going to be more and more coming up. Spain was one of the recent examples from Europe, and maybe some of you have read in the news how Spain or the Spanish government announced that it plans to be the first country in Europe to introduce UBI nationwide, and not just during this current crisis, but also afterwards, because it saw the need to help the people who are usually left behind in any crisis, the workers, the staff in supermarkets, the community workers who are understaffed and undervalued. Somebody has to protect these people as well. So to go back to the question that I started with, should UBI be introduced as a solution to offset the negative effects of job automation? As much as I'm optimistic about the solution, I know most world leaders still are not convinced. And I know that even though this crisis is happening now and it convinced some of them, 500 political and academic leaders have said it is an option, it's still not enough. However, if it might not be enough to implement it, but it might be just enough to test it. Because I think it's never been a better time for testing such a system, seeing how income inequality is growing, seeing the effects of job automation, now the coronavirus crisis. It's a desperate time now to try something to help the most impoverished people just make ends meet at the end of the day. Obviously, I answered hopefully some questions, but there's plenty of questions remaining after this presentation. The first one, or the first series, is who receives this income? Obviously, if it's universal, everybody should receive it. But initially, many governments would like to do it gradually, to tackle maybe or help tackle poverty. Give money only to a group of citizens which are most in need. In some cases, governments want to give this UBI, or call it basic income. It would not be UBI in this case. They would like to give them to people who are not working, who are jobless because of automation. So my bet is that UBI will not be implemented as UBI, but initially as some sort of a categorized basic income, in which the money will go to certain categories before it can be scaled nationwide. How big a payment should they receive? Obviously, this depends on the country where they live and the sort of income they could have there. But again, this is debatable. And what would happen to the existing means-tested safety net programs, which some of them do work? There are social welfare programs that do work. Do you dismantle all of them? Do you keep some of them? These are interesting questions which I didn't find an answer to yet, and I encourage you to also study them, because they will be coming more and more in the discussion in the coming years. And to finish, hopefully to leave some room for a discussion with Arthur, I want to share with you this quote from 1967 from Martin Luther King, who said, "I'm now convinced that the solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by a now widely discussed measure, the guaranteed income." So even though it's far too soon to declare UBI a solution to tackle the negative effects of job automation or to tackle poverty around the world, I strongly believe that given the way we are now as a society, the world needs such a solution. The world need to take immediate action, because there's no more time to wait. We need to implement a solution, be it UBI or something else, to help decrease some of the issues I mentioned before. And now with the coronavirus crisis, help humanity recover after probably the biggest crisis that we've ever been faced with, at least since the 1930s. So is UBI a solution? Remains to be seen, but I truly hope so. Thank you, and hopefully we still have time for discussion, Arthur, if you're here with me.